They thought they could bully me into ripping up my garden. They didn't realize they'd just started a war they couldn't win. The letter came on a Thursday, which was fitting. Thursdays always seemed to carry bad news, missed deliveries, dentist appointments, or in this case, a warning dressed in bureaucratic politeness. It came in one of those thick, cream-colored envelopes, the kind that screams, official and unpleasant. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association logo was embossed on the corner, and I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. I stood in my driveway for a moment, eyeing my front yard. The same yard I had poured every free evening, every ounce of free energy into for the past 2 years. Wild coneflowers nodded lazily in the breeze. Milkweed clustered like miniature fireworks around the base of a hand-carved sign that read, "Pollinator's Welcome." And my pride and joy, an old clawfoot bathtub I had upcycled into a frog pond, glistened in the sun. When I finally opened the letter, it was worse than I expected. Your property is in violation of Article 4, Section 3B of the Willow Creek HOA landscaping guidelines. Failure to comply within 14 calendar days will result in a daily fine of $100. My stomach dropped. The letter didn't explain what specifically was wrong, just that my landscaping did not align with community appearance standards, which, I already knew, was HOA speak for not enough grass, too many flowers, and definitely no frogs. I called the number listed, hoping for a calm, reasonable conversation. What I got was a snippy woman named Cheryl who sounded like she was chewing gum and filing her nails at the same time. "Yes, ma'am, we received a complaint," she said, dragging out the word complaint, like it was gospel. "We've had multiple residents express concern over the untidy nature of your yard." "Untidy?" I asked, stunned. "Everything in that garden is planted intentionally. It's a certified native species pollinator garden. It's supposed to look natural. That's the point. I'm sorry, but we don't make exceptions for alternative landscaping," she said. "You need to bring it up to code, meaning grass, trimmed hedges, and HOA-approved ground cover. That's standard." I tried to explain. I told her about the native bees that had returned for the first time in years, the monarch caterpillars I had watched inch along the milkweed stalks. I mentioned the articles I'd read about how native gardens were more sustainable, better for the local ecology, even helped prevent flooding by improving soil health. Her response? "That's great and all, but rules are rules." I hung up before I said something unkind. I walked outside and sat on the edge of my raised flower bed. A black swallowtail butterfly drifted past, delicate as ash in the wind. I thought back to the beginning, why I had done all of this. When I moved into Willow Creek, I had a lawn just like everyone else. It was lifeless, dull, expensive to maintain, and drank water like it was going out of style. I spent weekends mowing and fertilizing, and even then, I was rewarded with brown patches and the occasional fire ant invasion. Then one afternoon, while visiting my aunt in the country, I saw her yard buzzing with life. Bees darted from flower to flower, songbirds nested in tangled vines, and a bright green tree frog leapt out of her watering can. I stood there for an hour just taking it in. That moment changed something in me. I came home and started tearing up my lawn, literally. I replaced everything with native plants suited to our region's dry summers and clay-heavy soil. I researched for weeks. I sourced milkweed from a conservation nursery. I built a frog pond with rocks I collected from the river and old garden, bricks from a neighbor's remodel. I planted yarrow, goldenrod, purple salvia, and mountain mint. It didn't look like much the first season, just a patchy mess of seedlings and mulch. But by the second year, it bloomed. And it didn't just bloom with flowers, it came alive. The bees came first, dozens of species I'd never seen before. Then came the hummingbirds, flashing iridescent emerald as they zipped through the trumpet vines. In early spring, my heart almost stopped when I spotted a mama rabbit nursing her kits under the butterfly bush. It wasn't a yard. It was a habitat. And now, because someone down the street couldn't appreciate something that didn't come with a fertilizer subscription, the HOA wanted to rip it all out. I sat there on the garden wall until the sun dipped low and the frog, in the bathtub pond, let out its first croaky song of the evening. A soft breeze stirred the grasses, and I watched the silhouettes of moths dance in the last light. And somewhere in all that quiet beauty, a decision hardened in my chest. If the HOA wanted a war, then I would give them one. But I wasn't going to fight with rudeness or petty insults. I wasn't going to stoop to their level. I was going to fight them the one way they'd never expect. Legally, and with science on my side. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my jeans, and walked inside. I grabbed my laptop, opened a new browser tab, and typed into the search bar, "How to protect a pollinator garden from HOA restrictions." And just like that, the war officially began. I wasn't the kind of person who liked conflict. Normally, I'd do anything to keep the peace, bake cookies for the neighbors, wave politely at board members, quietly grumble about the HOA behind closed doors like everyone else. But this wasn't about someone's trash cans being left out, too long, or a fence needing paint. This was about the living, breathing corner of the planet I had nurtured into something beautiful. This was about the birds, the bees, the frogs, and the little pocket of magic I had managed to carve out of a suburb obsessed with conformity. I spent the first night after the call curled up on the couch with my laptop and a mug of tea that went cold before I remembered to drink it. I scoured forums and read blog posts by people who had been through similar HOA nightmares. Most had ended in compromise, planting native gardens behind the house, hiding wildflowers behind hedges, agreeing to mow more often. But those solutions felt like giving in, like apologizing for doing the right thing. I didn't want to hide my garden. I wanted to protect it. It wasn't until close to midnight that I stumbled on something different, a link buried deep in a State Environmental Agency website, Urban Wildlife Habitat Initiative. The name alone gave me a small thrill. I clicked through. It was a program run by the State Department of Natural Resources, designed to encourage residents, even those in urban or suburban areas, to turn their yards into functional ecosystems. It wasn't just about pretty flowers. It was about biodiversity, sustainability, and conservation. And this is what made me sit up straight. If you met certain criteria, your property could be certified as a wildlife conservation area. I read every requirement twice. Then again, you needed at least 3 types of native plants that supported pollinators, a reliable water source, shelter for small animals, no chemical pesticides or synthetic fertilizers, a visible effort to promote native wildlife. I had all of it, and then some. I closed the laptop and stared out the window into the dark. My garden wasn't just beautiful, it was qualified. It could be protected. The next morning, I got to work like it was my full-time job. I spent hours cataloging the species in my yard. I had milkweed, yarrow, bee balm, goldenrod, purple coneflower, switchgrass, and mountain mint. I had a pond with aquatic plants and tadpoles. I had bee hotels made from hollow reeds, butterfly houses, and logs left intentionally to decay for beetles. I had birds, cardinals, finches, wrens, and at least 2 nesting spots confirmed. I started taking photos, time-stamped and labeled, showing bees feeding, butterflies laying eggs, birds bathing. I even managed to record a frog chorus one night, just before a storm rolled in. By the 3rd day, I had filled an entire binder with evidence. Printed photos, hand-drawn maps of the yard layout, notes on blooming periods, records of which species I'd seen and when. It felt like I was back in college prepping for a final project. Only this time, the stakes weren't grades. They were the survival of my little ecosystem. Still, I wanted someone to validate what I was seeing. I reached out to the local university's environmental science department, half expecting no reply. To my surprise, a grad student named Lucas emailed me back that same day. I'm working on a thesis about urban pollinator corridors, he wrote. Would love to come check it out if you're open to a visit. He showed up 2 days later with a battered field notebook and the kind of enthusiasm only someone deep in thesis season could have. He spent 2 hours walking the garden, kneeling to observe tiny bees, gently flipping leaves to point out chrysalises, and absolutely losing his mind when a tiger swallowtail flew right past us. You've got something special here, he said as he scribbled notes. This isn't just a nice garden, it's an actual functioning habitat. I'm going to include this in my research, if that's okay. It was more than okay. By the end of the week, I had my application ready. I sent it to the state program coordinator, included digital copies of all my documentation, and dropped the physical binder in the mail just to be thorough. Then I waited, and checked my inbox twice a day. 2 weeks later, I got the email. Congratulations, your property has been certified as a wildlife conservation area under the Urban Wildlife Habitat Initiative. Your certification packet and signage will arrive by mail shortly. I stared at the screen, stunned and giddy. I hadn't just built a garden, I'd built a sanctuary, and now it had legal backing. 3 days after that, a large envelope arrived. Inside was a letter, a gold-sealed certificate, and a green metal sign that read, Certified Wildlife Conservation Area. Protected under State Environmental Code 12.4b3. I held the sign in my hands like it was a trophy. The next morning, I walked to the HOA office, which was a beige building with no soul and a faint smell of printer ink. I stepped into the front. Lobby and Cheryl, yes, the same Cheryl, was behind the desk, flipping through a magazine. Hi again, I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I'm here to drop something off. I slid the certificate across the counter, along with a printed copy of the state code and a letter of explanation. Cheryl glanced at it, then did a double take at the bolded phrase, State Recognized Wildlife Conservation Area. What is this? She asked, clearly unsettled. This is legal recognition that my garden is a protected habitat, which means any attempts to remove or alter it would be a direct violation of state environmental policy. She stared at me, mouth slightly open, and I could see the wheels turning. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. I'll, have to send this to the board, she said finally, her voice smaller than before. You do that, I said, still smiling. And please note, all future communications should go through the Department of Natural Resources if you have concerns. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just planted a flag on the moon. That evening, I installed the official sign right at the edge of my garden, where anyone passing by could see it. I took a picture and posted it online with the caption, The HOA tried to fine me for my garden, so I made it untouchable. I didn't know it yet, but that post would be the spark that lit the fire. They didn't give up easily. I didn't expect them to. After I dropped off the certification and walked out of the HOA office with my head high and my sign in hand, I thought, naively I admit, that would be the end of it. I assumed the seal of the state would be enough to make them back off, drop their little crusade, and leave my garden alone. But I should have known better. The first sign came in the form of silence. No emails, no letters, nothing. Just a tense, uneasy quiet. For a week, maybe 2, I heard nothing from them, and I figured they were regrouping, planning. And sure enough, I was right. One morning I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting to see butterflies rising from the flowers like confetti, and instead saw a stranger walking along the sidewalk taking photos of my yard. Not subtle ones either. He had a clipboard, a phone with a large lens attachment, and a frown like he'd just smelled something bad. Can I help you? I called out, careful to keep my tone level. Just doing a property inspection, he said quickly, not making eye contact. The HOA sent me. I nearly laughed. An inspection? Of what? My daisies? Still, I let him do his thing, knowing that my garden was now legally protected. He took his pictures, scribbled some notes, and left without a word. The very next day, I received an email. It was short, terse, and filled with just enough legalese to try to sound intimidating. They claimed the certificate I submitted was under review and that they were consulting with county zoning authorities to determine if additional permissions were required for conservation designation within HOA-controlled residential areas. It was nonsense, complete bluff, but it still made my chest tighten. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by documents. I reread the wildlife program's guidelines, pulled up the county's zoning maps, even checked with a lawyer friend from college just to be safe. Everything was in order. The HOA had no legal standing to challenge a state-recognized conservation designation. But what they could do, I realized, was make things uncomfortable. And they did. They started sending subtle but snide notices. Friendly reminders about the placement of my trash bins. A vague complaint about non-conforming decorative structures, likely referencing the frog pond. A ridiculous note asking me to limit yard noise after dusk, as if I had any control over when frogs sang. But what they didn't count on was how much attention this was about to get. It started with a post. I uploaded a picture of my garden sign, the pond glimmering behind it, and wrote, HOA tried to fine me for my pollinator garden. I registered it as a wildlife conservation area instead. Now it's state protected. I wasn't expecting much. I figured a few friends would like it, maybe share it. The post exploded. Within a few days it had been shared over 10,000 times. Messages poured in, some from fellow gardeners, some from people just angry on my behalf. I received emails from conservation groups, asking if they could feature my story. One person sent me a digital illustration of my frog pond with the caption, "Nature always wins." And then, my neighbors began to take notice. It started with quiet knocks at the door. A woman from 3 houses down came by with her 6-year-old daughter. She wanted to see the butterflies, she said shyly. I led them through the garden, pointing out a monarch caterpillar curled on a milkweed leaf. The girl's eyes lit up like Christmas. Another neighbor stopped by the next morning. I had no idea that was even possible, he said. My wife and I were thinking about replacing our grass. Mind if I ask you some questions? Soon, it wasn't just me defending my garden. People started showing up, not just to look, but to support. One Sunday, a local teacher brought her 3rd grade class for a mini field trip. She had them draw pictures of their favorite flowers. A few days later, a mom posted a photo online of her son standing next to my conservation sign, holding a crayon drawing of a frog. The neighborhood began to buzz, and not just with bees. Then came the blogger. Her name was Tanya, and she ran a local news blog mostly about city council meetings and farmers markets. She emailed me asking if I'd be open to an interview. I said yes. She came over with a notepad and asked sharp, thoughtful questions. She stayed for an hour, took 100 photos, and published the story that same evening. The headline: HOA tries to kill butterfly garden. Nature-loving homeowner fights back and wins. It went viral within a day, and suddenly it wasn't just a few curious neighbors anymore. Strangers drove in from nearby towns. People left thank you notes taped to my mailbox. A retired biology professor offered to give weekend garden tours and started bringing laminated ID cards for insects and birds. I knew something had truly shifted the night I saw the HOA president, Mr. Gerald Pickering himself, standing on the sidewalk just beyond my front yard, arms crossed, watching as a group of toddlers crouched around the pond, giggling at the frogs. He looked like he'd bitten into a lemon. I waved at him. He didn't wave back. The next HOA board meeting was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Word had spread, and the community showed up, really showed up. People who'd never bothered to attend before were packed into the meeting room like sardines. Some brought signs. One elderly woman had a shirt that said, "Fines for flowers? Are you kidding me?" I brought my own materials, photos, Charts showing the increase in pollinator activity. Even Lucas, the grad student, who stood up and explained how the garden contributed to broader pollinator corridors through suburban neighborhoods. They tried to speak over us, to redirect the meeting, to say it wasn't on the agenda. But the crowd wasn't having it. One man stood up and said, "You're fining someone for improving the environment? Why isn't the HOA encouraging this?" That was the turning point. They knew they'd lost the crowd. They couldn't spin it. They couldn't silence the story. And I didn't gloat. I just stood tall, hands folded in front of me, letting the momentum carry the truth forward. The board said they'd reconsider the issue and review community input. That was their version of waving a white flag. But it didn't matter. The garden was here to stay. The people had spoken, and the frogs sang louder than ever that night. The war was over. I'd won. But what happened next was something I hadn't expected at all. Something bigger, something better. After the board's reluctant retreat, everything changed. Like the whole neighborhood exhaled a breath it didn't know it had been holding. The HOA didn't formally apologize, of course. That would have required admitting they were wrong. Instead, they quietly backed off. The fines vanished. The threats stopped. The inspections never came again. They just faded. And for the first time in weeks, I could step into my garden without wondering if someone was watching from behind the blinds. I thought things would settle there, a small victory for one small yard. But word kept spreading. The story refused to die down. Local news stations picked it up. One morning I opened my front door to find a TV crew standing on the sidewalk. "Just a quick interview," the anchor said, already brushing powder on her face. "You're kind of a local legend now." I blinked, half awake, holding a cup of coffee and wearing a t-shirt with a frog on it. The next day my inbox was overflowing. Garden clubs invited me to speak at their meetings. Environmental nonprofits reached out with collaboration ideas. A teacher from 3 towns over asked if her science class could write letters to me. They did dozens of them. Handwritten notes on notebook paper, crayon drawings of bees, questions like, "How many frogs do you have?" And, "Can I grow milkweed in a pot?" I answered every one of them. Then, something even more unexpected happened. One of the newer families in the neighborhood, the Garcias, knocked on my door one evening. Mr. Garcia held a tray of cupcakes. His wife, Maria, smiled as their two. Kids peeked around her legs, eyes wide. "We just wanted to say thank you," she said. "Our kids didn't even know what a monarch was before we moved here. Now they spend every afternoon looking for butterflies in your yard." I invited them in, and we ended up spending an hour in the garden with flashlights, showing the kids where the toads slept beneath the stones and how to spot the shiny eyes of tree frogs peeking out from leaves. That night, something clicked. This garden wasn't just for me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I started offering weekend tours, nothing formal, just an open gate and a chalkboard sign out front. "Wildlife Garden Open. Come learn something." I expected a few curious passers-by. Instead, families came. Retirees came. Teenagers showed up with sketchbooks. People brought lawn chairs. Someone donated a bench. Soon others wanted to know how to do it themselves. "How do I start?" they'd ask. "Where do I even begin?" So I put together a little guide. I called it Start Your Yard's Comeback. It was nothing fancy, just a few pages with tips about native plants, how to attract pollinators, and where to get free seeds. I printed out copies and left them in a waterproof box by the garden gate. They disappeared faster than I could restock them. Then, the most surprising development of all, the HOA came knocking. Well, not literally. They sent an email. A carefully worded one. The board had reviewed the recent enthusiasm for native gardening and was considering adjustments to the landscaping guidelines to allow more sustainable alternatives. I read it twice, then a third time. They weren't just giving up. They were changing. They asked if I'd be willing to join a new committee to help revise the rules. Me, the person they tried to fine into submission. I didn't say yes right away. I sat on it, thought about it, talked to neighbors, and then I said yes. I joined the committee, helped rewrite the guidelines. We added a section allowing certified wildlife gardens, outlined a process for approval, and even encouraged other residents to apply for state conservation status if they wanted to. It wasn't perfect, but it was a massive leap forward. By that fall, 3 more yards in the neighborhood had made the switch. The Garcias were first. They turned their front lawn into a low-maintenance prairie strip full of goldenrod and asters. Then the Thompsons put in a rain garden. A single mom down the street replaced her entire backyard with native grasses and a water feature made from an old whiskey barrel. It started looking less like a manicured suburb and more like what it might have looked like 100 years ago, buzzing, fluttering, humming with life. And the wildlife came. I saw species I hadn't seen before, green lacewings, indigo buntings, even a box turtle that wandered through one rainy morning. And more importantly, I saw people noticing. Kids stopped riding. Bikes passed without looking. Adults slowed down on their walks. People took photos, sat on benches, asked questions. The whole street started paying attention again, not to lawns or hedges or whose trash bins were crooked, but to life. One day, while pulling weeds near the pond, I looked up and realized something amazing. The same people who once whispered about my yard, who maybe even filed the original complaint, were now copying it, borrowing from it, taking inspiration from it. And I didn't feel smug. I felt hopeful. Because that's the thing about planting something real. It spreads. Not just the roots or the seeds, but the idea. What started as a personal passion project grew into a legal fight, and that grew into a movement. I never set out to be an activist. I just wanted butterflies and frogs in my yard. I wanted to feel connected to something bigger than my job or my bills or the color of my mailbox. But that connection had ripple effects, and those ripples turned into waves. The garden still stands. Every morning I walk outside with my coffee and listen to the buzzing and croaking and chirping. And I smile. Because I know what it took to keep it here. And I know what it's become. Not just a garden, not just a habitat. A reminder that one person with enough stubbornness and love for the earth can change more than their yard. They can change minds, they can change rules, and sometimes, if they plant deep enough roots, they can change a whole community.